today is Kierkegaard. And in fact, there's a BBC video on him that last time I checked it, it still worked.
In Russia, 70 years later, the power of Marx's fusion of critical analysis and revolutionary practice was to be demonstrated. Here, it seemed, men were no longer the victims of history. They'd seized control of it.
What's this, see your face?
It says Kierkegaard.
Let's watch to find out.
This is 1917.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, every single individual needs to be reformed. It's an illusion. The individual stands alone. The ethical reality of the individual is the only reality. It is not doctrine which ought to be revised. It is not the church which ought to be reformed and so on. No. It is existences that should be revised.
I bet the reason they filmed it that way is because you have, what are those black shaped things of the face?
Oh,
they have
those are,
so they're kind of
they're trying to do that.
imitating that.
One of the poorest parishes in the poorest district was Sedan. It couldn't afford a pastor of its own, and the parish house was let to a peasant family. Surnames weren't yet fixed, and they were nicknamed after their address.
So Kierkegaard means the churchyard, and that's because that's where they live.
Kierkegaard was by far the most gifted of modern Christian thinkers. At the time when Marx was in Paris, he was developing a new approach to philosophy that came to be called existentialism. The chief influence on his life had been his father, who was born here in the wastes of the Jutland Heath back in the 1760s, at a time when Denmark was still feudal and backward. 11-year-old Michael lived very rough, working as a shepherd boy and out in all
That's
weathers.
the father.
70 years later, his son Søren recalled something that happened at that time.
A dreadful case of a man who, when he was a little boy, suffered much hardship, was hungry, numb with cold. He stood on a hillock and cursed God. And the man was not able to forget this when he was 82 years old.
The young Michael Kierkegaard escaped from peasant life to become eventually a businessman in Copenhagen. He grew rich and retired early, outwardly successful, but guilt-ridden and melancholy. His second wife bore him 7 children, of whom Søren was the last and dearest. But the wife and 5 of the children
One of the
died.
things he might have felt
The
guilty
old man
for was
devoted
his
all
second
his
wife
energies to Søren.
was his previous servant woman,
As a
who
child,
was the servant woman when his wife was still alive, and the first baby came along pretty soon.
Ooh,
Human
boy.
speaking to them.
So
It's a crazy upbringing.
What a cheek.
The depth of my melancholy was only equalled by the depth of my skill in concealing it. My one joy was that nobody could discover how unhappy I felt.
well, he's trying to act like Kierkegaard, and he was pretty
Well,
weird.
Kierkegaard seems like
I've never had any immediate,
I think part of it though is because he was Danish.
ordinary human sense of love.
I
Just
think
throw them all
so.
in a basket. They're strange.
And yet they're like supposed to be the happiest country on earth right now. And it's like, according to who? According to the Danes. So you're listening to some really weird people say that they're so happy.
To last.
I'm not sure we should
Are they
make
just
it.
trying to
The happiest city too. Technically, didn't we talk about this a couple days ago where we talked about
After the naval
stress
defeats
and, like,
inflicted by
and it
Nelson,
all just kind of
the old feudal and imperial
And the
order
dating
in
thing,
Denmark
yeah.
broke down, and the country modernized.
their
It
mindset
embraced
is
industrialism
wired
from
that way.
England.
Can't really
and
measure happiness,
romanticism
I don't
from
think.
Germany.
Other than
Yeah.
At this time,
Other than
Kierkegaard,
they're
still a
goofy, but I
student in
always found them
Copenhagen,
pretty cool. But
fell in love with Regina
You could be
Ghost,
happy
then still a
sometime
very
during the
young
day
girl.
yeah.
and
But he saw
really
erotic
upset,
love,
you know, while you're driving
and
home in the
therefore his
traffic.
wooing
You know,
of Regina
Yeah.
in romantic
You know,
and
you
It's
could-
so weird
comfort,
how quick.
as a doomed, insatiable
But I think you can
yearning
say
after an
overall you've been
unattainable
feeling
ideal.
happy, or overall you've been
The
feeling
theme of
negative.
the opera he loved
Or
best
yourself.
of all.
I apologize to people all the time for how happy I am because
Why? Why would
I
you
feel guilty.
apologize for that?
I feel guilty for being happy all the
Don't feel
time.
guilty. At least like you have that going for you, because other people can't.
Well, but I was raised
Be
Being
too
incredibly
happy.
Roman
happy.
Catholic, so I would feel guilty if I didn't feel guilty.
It's true. Sounds more like
You
Canadian.
feel guilty because you. Yeah, that.
Yeah, I'm only
I'm so
comfortable if
sorry.
I'm feeling guilty for something.
That's. So you're constantly feeling guilty?
Yes.
That's awful.
Well, I'm a sinner.
I mean, aren't we all?
Well, yeah, but some of us don't realize we are, you know, so.
Erotic passion
I mean-
can be dangerous. Don Giovanni is punished for his
Oh, well.
excesses by being dragged off to hell.
Drat. Guess I'm just
But
going
the
to
theatre
hell.
is a place of paradoxes and transformations. With the death of his father and his love for Regina, Kierkegaard's view of his own life
Regina?
is
I always
about
said
to undergo
Regina.
a dramatic change.
Wednesday,
Sounds like a
April
cookie
the
Denmark
19th.
name.
Marisol, self-isolation.
I've been to Denmark with my Oculus Rift.
Oh, I was
I
gonna
knew
say,
you were
is it
gonna say
pretty? Damn it.
I've actually,
You didn't go when you were in Berlin?
I,
Yeah, you were that close.
I was, well, I went to Bremerhaven
Yeah.
because that's where my car was delivered and where I dropped it off to ship it back after 3 years. So that's the closest I got to Denmark
That's
was
pretty close.
Bremerhaven. But when I'm looking at it through virtual reality, the place looks flatter than New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah, it's and
So
if
far.
you've gone, like I've gone to Elsinore and looked at the castle, you know, where Hamlet takes place. It's a real place. It's a real castle, and boy, what a dreary, you know, place that is.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so again, you know, there's like no mountains. There's no.
Just coastline.
And it's
boring.
pretty far north, you know, so they have the same sad, you know,
They need happy lights.
yeah, they need happy lights. Although, of course, the Danes have lived there all these years. They're Vikings,
Right.
basically.
They used to.
Right. I suppose, yeah. Their foods, mostly, yeah,
Rotten fish.
exactly.
Like the rest of the
You know.
Scandinavian.
So, as far as I know, they don't have weird things like lutefisk or things of that sort. That I can't imagine if you had to live on fish
Vegetarian.
preserved in lye.
I'm
A lot of
okay.
herring.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
hard pass.
My mom loves that crap.
Sounds
So,
disgusting.
Herring's gross.
in Copenhagen, you have the Little Mermaid story,
Yeah.
and I've been out looking for her, and you can find her, and there's bus tours to this poor little statue that's sitting on a rock out in Copenhagen. It's, you know, like
Sounds awesome.
Oh, this is
whoop-de-doo,
a pretty
you
cool
know.
town
I suppose. A lot of pot.
I
though.
suppose.
Yeah, it's very. It's kind of like
It's liberal.
Amsterdam of the Vikings.
We passed the store last
That's
night,
awesome.
All right.
Waffles and.
or was it?
yeah.
No, it was Tuesday night. Tuesday night I went and I saw the movie Ready Player One. And when we were driving home, my daughter laughed because we passed a store that's named Dankerage.
Oh yeah. Have you not heard of it yet?
Where is that? Right behind REI.
Yeah, and
Wow. Way to
and
call
I
people
wouldn't
out.
have caught on what it was all about.
Wait, what is it?
But she explained.
Dankerage?
Yeah. Head shop.
It's
Yeah.
a dank shop.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. It's
So-
not as lame as it sounds. It's one of the nicer ones.
It's one of the nicer pot places.
Yeah, they're really cool. It's like people in REI.
Yeah, I bet eventually like the workers from REI like were applied. to
Well,
have a job.
remember, I had a clearance in MI, and as far as I know, I have to maintain that somehow if I want to keep getting my pension. I want to put my pension
Oh, so
into.
you're not allowed to,
I
like-
don't know. Yeah, I think if you break the law or something, you
Federal
can
law.
lose your federal pension. Oh
No.
well, I'm not gonna do anything.
Personally,
to-
I think it smells.
Oh.
Weed smells like skunk, so I can't really get past that. So I haven't. If anyone has ever smelled skunk before, that's
Oh, yeah, I've been sprayed by
I'm
skunk.
pretty sure that
yeah.
Soren Kierkegaard
It's-
would have used weed if they had it.
For what?
Well, he used alcohol pretty well.
Well,
I read that in biblical times they used hemp oil.
Oh, there's hemp being used.
like
for a while.
CBD, like the stuff that doesn't make you like crazy, but or not crazy, but hallucinate.
Crazy.
But
yeah.
in-
It's mild.
And looking back, I mean, obviously they didn't have this diagnosis then. But today, a contemporary, who I think is a great author,
Sometimes my car air conditioning smells like.
Kay Redfield.
I don't know if that's.
Air conditioning smells like weed. To you?
Yeah, like when I don't smoke, but like every time I turn on the
Did you
heater-
buy it secondhand? Like.
No, like it starts smelling like weed, and I'm like, it smells really good, but I don't know where it's coming from.
I don't like the smell.
It's-
And I
yeah.
smoke casually, but like I don't like the
can't.
smell at all.
It smells really bad.
I want the world to leave me alone.
The artistic nature of pain and creativity of what's happening.
Her?
No,
not do that.
this lady looks big, big.
Well, I suppose it's funny. It's a little like the waves of grief. I think you have waves of awareness. And one of the things that I found with grief was that actually I was well prepared for it by the cyclicity of my manic depressive illness, and because I was used to things coming and going and so forth. So I think that my awareness of having bipolar illness really, when I was 17, I got very, very depressed, and I was psychotic, and I didn't have any energy, and it was totally, but I didn't have the words. People didn't talk about it at that time, and people certainly didn't have the words bipolar illness or manic depressive illness. So I just was terrified. I had no idea what had happened to me. And I was very frightened, and I was frightened it would come back. But I got well, and then I did what everybody, or most people do when they get well. I sort of put it behind me again. And then it would come and hit me again and again. And so I knew there was something wrong. I started to see a psychiatrist, tried to see a psychiatrist when I was in college. And I ended up just running away, and I couldn't tolerate the idea of doing that. But then when after I got my degree and I joined the medical school faculty at UCLA, I became ravingly manic and very psychotic, hallucinating, delusional. I didn't have any choice. And it's the great advantage of having an illness as severe as mine is that you are automatically brought into the medical care system. If you have as long as it was milder, I could kind of get by with actually out having to face the severity of my problem. And I knew the person I wanted to see. It was somebody I had trained with, and he was my clinical supervisor. And I had seen him with patients, and I had seen that he was tough and smart and compassionate and a humanist, but also knew science and medicine. And so I went to him terrified. And he was just absolutely firm in his diagnosis. He just never wavered. And he just said, that's the way it is. But he was kind about it, but he didn't back off from it. And he was a great psychotherapist. And so one of the things I've tried to do in my professional life, like a lot of my colleagues, is to emphasize, medications just aren't enough for many people with these illnesses. Because exactly what you're saying is, how do you become aware of an illness? You become aware of an illness by understanding yourself and understanding the meaning that illness has in your own life, symbolically and, more importantly, quite literally. primarily been psychotic when manic, which is not uncommon with mania. And
So, she's written quite a few interesting books on this. By the way, I recommend them if you know people who have mania or bipolar or psychoses. Kay Redfield has The Unquiet Mind, Touched by Fire, Night Falls Fast. Pretty interesting, because of course she's lived through it. Plus she's a psychiatrist. By the way, she's also a popular speaker. So a lot of YouTube videos of her.
She's a really good speaker.
Yeah, she's because she's been there. But in her book Touched by Fire, she talks about philosophers that she's analyzed retrospectively and pointed out that, gosh, they look like they had what I have, because they're going through these same kind of manic depressive stages, and Kierkegaard is one of them. So today when we look back and try to figure out what made Kierkegaard tick, it seems like a good prognosis or diagnosis that he had a manic depressive bipolar problem, which of course wouldn't have been identifiable at the time. But so he gets really depressed with himself, where he's suicidal. He's in his journals, his memoirs, he writes, I'd be the hit of the party. Everyone likes talking to me. They love my humor, my jokes, because he was one of those really bright people that could always come up with a snappy response to things, and people loved that at the parties. And they're drinking and having a good time. But then he goes home and he wants to kill himself. And he's got a pistol, so it must have come close, at least a couple of times. He proposes to Regina, I guess the BBC guy pronounced it, and she agreed to marry him. But 2 weeks before the wedding, he canceled it. And of course, everyone's wondering why the heck was this the case. And in fact, 2 years later, she married someone else, and he was furious with her because he thought, how could you have loved me and then married somebody else? Well, but she didn't marry, he didn't let her marry him. So that's, probably good reason for marrying someone else, I suppose.
Seems valid.
But he also wrote a short story called The Diary of a Seducer. And in this, I remember being furious with him when I read it, because he's a young man. He's interested in seeing if he could get this woman to elope with him. So he goes through this very scientific set of stages of trying to get her interested in him. The way he describes it in this little short story, he gets her interested, and gets her to become more interested, and then finally he proposes an elopement, where she'll come out of her house at like 3 a.m. and get into this coach cab, right? And he'll drive off to the park, and that's where Kierkegaard, the character in the play, will. Or the short story will meet her, and then they'll drive off together and get married and elope, etc. And so she actually does. She comes out of the house at 3 a.m. with her luggage, gets into the cab drives off to the park, and they sit there waiting for him, and he never comes.
What an asshole.
Because he wasn't interested in actually eloping with her. He was just trying to see if he could get her to that point.
What a dick.
Yeah.
You see why I was so angry with him when I was reading it, because the whole point of that, of course, is actually get married. And he wasn't interested in that. He just wanted to see if he could get her there. And he was playing a game.
He was a player.
And so it makes you wonder, wow, what about his real life experience with Regina?
He could have starred on Catfish.
Was that kind of what happened there, or what, you know? But the other explanation for it was that knowing the mood shifts that he went through, he didn't want her to have to put up with living with him, so that he basically canceled the marriage because he was concerned about what that would do to her. So that's and
Is that what he wrote about? Is that what he said?
that's speculation.
Oh, okay.
She actually, once she got married, the family moved to the United States, so she left Denmark. So he was planning on becoming a Lutheran minister, but he went in and out of being in that. You know, I think that's another characteristic of manic depressive people. But meanwhile, he's studying Hegel. Hegel was like the philosophy of the day, and he studied that. And then he went to Berlin and studied philosophy at Berlin under the teaching of Friedrich Schelling. And by the way, one of the other individuals in the same class was Karl Marx. So that's kind of interesting that you have both existentialism founded by Kierkegaard and Marxism founded by Marx, of course, in kind of response to the Schelling teaching them Hegel. And if you think about it, remember Schelling was Hegel's roommate at Tübingen, and Schelling was the brilliant young guy, and Hegel was kind of the old man. They even called him that. And when they graduated and went off, Schelling was the one that became the famous philosopher right away. Hegel kind of, initially was like a tutor in some houses, and gradually got invited by Schelling to come to Jena and become a philosophy professor there with him, and then started writing his famous books. And of course, once he writes his books, he's actually criticizing Schelling's philosophy, which breaks them up as friends, right? And yet everyone likes Hegel, so Hegel becomes like the more famouser of the two of them, right? And then becomes the head, basically, of the academic community through his being president of or chancellor of the university in Berlin. But then he dies in 1831. And a few years later, Schelling ends up becoming the replacement. And so
All worked out.
here's Kierkegaard and Marx together studying the history of philosophy, and Schelling presents Hegel's philosophy as a stepping stone to his own philosophy. And by the way, Schelling referred to his philosophy as existenz philosophy, which sounds an awful lot like existentialism to me. But, and it's still kind of an important thing if you really get into philosophy and the stages of its development. Schelling's philosophy was a precursor to Hegel's philosophy, and Hegel's philosophy is really thought of as being a trump to Schelling's, a more developed Romanticism period philosophy. And Schelling must have really messed it up in his presentation, because Kierkegaard rebels against Hegel, and in rebelling against Hegel argues that man is totally alone. We're not influenced by the peer pressure of society, etc. Instead, you're your own individual. You have freedom, etc. Once you've studied Hegel and you realize how all of the philosophies of the world, the religions of the world, are human-made, created, by authorities that are trying to have authority over you by convincing you that this is the morally right thing, these are the rules, this is what God wants you to do, etc. basically to give them power over you so that they can tell you what you have to do and control you. But if you understand that that's how society works, you, as in Nietzsche, will also interpret it this way, become free of that authority. You become free of that control because you could step out of it, and now you become your own authority. You have to create meaning for yourself instead of let someone else tell you how to live your life. So then the question becomes, is our article, right, how should you live then? You're the one that has to decide for yourself, right? So how do you decide for yourself if you're the one that has to make meaning for yourself? How do you do it? Remember, Nietzsche argues that the way you do it is you keep trying to have power over other people by creating new values and then convincing other people to accept those values too. So that makes you the Übermensch. But Kierkegaard's response is different. He believes that what you have to do is really believe in a particular narrative and believe that it is true, even though they are man-made. So it's a real dilemma, because on the one hand, if all the narratives are man-made, you don't believe them. But if on the other hand, you have to believe in such a narrative, because otherwise you have no meaning in your life, then you're stuck, right? And notice that this is why it becomes a very depressing situation, right? Now, he says, on the night, though, that you realize you have to believe something, this is a night of fear and trembling. You're literally just in a sweat because you realize without such a belief, you have no reason to live. Why not commit suicide? You know, that's the fear, right, that he has, right? So you have to believe something. So he argues that you go through stages on life's way. And these stages occur, I believe, after you've studied philosophy. Now you're aware of how these narratives have developed in dialectical response to one another. They're competing meta-narratives, you know, and you're now at the point where you have to create or believe your own meta-narrative. So what do you believe in first? Well, he says the first stage is the stage that's associated with just enjoying life, right? He calls this the aesthetic stage, right? You know, where basically you should just have a good time.
20s. Yeah.
Right? You know, that's you know, just enjoy life, right? And you know, basically, you know, that's the stage. You know, you can imagine that people will go through this, you know, and just do all sorts of things. Trouble is, eventually, your leg no longer works because you've crashed through a branch. You know, your knee is destroyed through, you know, whatever kind of surgery. So, you know, all the different kinds of things. You know, these extreme fun things you've been doing turn out to be bad for the body, and eventually you can't do them anymore. You're getting older. You have to stop doing this kind of stuff, and so what's the next stage, you know, that you're going to go into? And I think what naturally happens too is if you marry and you have children, you now need the kind of stage of life where you're going to be a responsible adult, and you have to do adulting. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, that's exactly what they call
right?
it. Good
You
job.
have to be
Yeah.
that stage,
Adulting,
right?
yeah.
Adulting, right? And for example, you're going to start going back to a church. You know, when you went to college, you gave up church because, you know, you basically thought,
And
you
then
know, in
because
college
it's
they
missing.
told you all this stuff was bullshit, right?
Yeah.
You know. You haven't heard that yet? No? Oh, well, I've got the video.
Oh, great. Chief Mark.
I guess.
But I am into the intellectual thing. I went to college. I studied the great philosophers, Socrates.
Socrates.
I studied Plato. And,
Plato.
you learn the important things. Like if you're studying geology, which is all facts, as soon as you get out of school, you forget it all, because it's just numbers and things. But philosophy, you remember just enough to screw you up for the rest of your life. And you studied the important, like ethical questions. Is it okay to yell movie in a crowded firehouse? Religious questions. Does the Pope shit in the woods?
Why haven't we discussed these yet? Obviously important. Philosophical questions.
Keep waiting sometime, oh. If there is a God, give me a sign. See, I told you that the... Wouldn't it be weird if you died,
Here you
woke
go.
up, you were in heaven?
Adam, here
Just
you
like
go.
they always told you. Everybody had wings on and pearly gates. Wouldn't you feel stupid? Oh no! You mean that this is what? Ah! In college, they said this was all bullshit. Oh, well, I'll just come in and... What? You've been keeping records on me? Well, it wasn't so bad. How many times did I take the Lord's name in vain? Ooh. 1,000,006. Jesus Christ.
You forget Steve Martin was such an accomplished comedian before all
This is a philosophy major.
Was he really?
Yes.
That is awesome.
And he
Good for him.
also played the banjo. Still does, actually.
That is badass.
Play what?
Banjo.
The banjo.
That's awesome.
So, after college, you kind of quit church for a while. But once you get
After
married and you
college.
have a child, or today, I don't know if you're necessarily getting married, but you have a child or 2 or 3 or 15, whatever, and you feel like, they need religious education. Believe it or not, a lot of people that don't believe in God or religion will go back, pick a church, and go back to the church for their children's sake. The thing is, they don't really believe in the religion, so their hearts are not in it. It's not like they're really enthusiastic about the religion. They just feel like they need to participate in the community for the benefit of their family. So Kierkegaard refers to this as the ethical stage. You're now acting the way you should in society, not because you believe that the values of the society are true, but because you think that's what you ought to do in order to fit in with the community and for the best interest of the children and your family, etc. So you act a certain way, even though you don't believe it. The trouble, of course, is that unless you really believe that meta-narrative, you wouldn't be like the soldier that would sacrifice his life for the country, because you don't believe it. It's like the foxhole thing, where the guys in the foxhole, the one who really believes that we're there to fight against the enemy to save mankind against this enemy, we'll throw snowballs at the enemy tanks, anything, ice cream, whatever, to try to
Wait, no.
stop the tanks.
I wanna keep
The other guy, though, that's in the same foxhole is like, you've got to be kidding me. We don't have any ammo. I don't believe the reason we're here. I'm running, so, I'm not going to throw my ice cream at the tank,
I wanna keep it.
Sustenance.
That's, by the way, the ice cream throwing, that's Eddie Izzard, if you're wondering where I stole that from.
Where?
Eddie Izzard. Eddie Izzard? Eddie Izzard.
So yeah, so we had empires. In Europe we had empires everywhere. We had France and Spain and Britain and Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, full of furniture for some reason. And the Austro-Hungarian Empire, famous for fuck all. Yes, all they did was slowly collapse like a flan in a cupboard. And the German Empire, very organized, always build an empire, ein, zwei, build an empire, very Prussian. And then they'd celebrate with the World War, and then lose the whole fucking empire by the end of the war. In the 30s, Hitler, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, Second World War, Russian front, not a good idea. Hitler never played Risk when he was a kid. Because, you know, playing Risk, you could never hold on to Asia. That Asian, Eastern European area, you could never hold it, could you? 7 extra minutes at the beginning of every go, but you couldn't fucking hold it. Australasia, that was the one, Australasia. All the purples. Get everyone on Papua New Guinea and just build up and build up. And Hitler ended up in a ditch covered in petrol on fire. So, that's fun. I think that's funny. Because he was a mass murdering fuckhead. And that was his honeymoon as well. Double trouble. Hey. Ava, let's marry him. Where shall our honeymoon be? Well, in a ditch, covered in petrol on fire. I've already arranged it upstairs. Oh, how romantic, Adolf. Yes, I know. Fun. What a bastard. And he was a vegetarian and a painter, so he must have been going, I can't get the fucking trees. Damn, I will kill everyone in the world. And he was a mass murdering fuckhead, as many important historians have said. And, but there are other mass murderers who got away with it. Stalin killed many millions, died in his bed. Well done there. Pol Pot killed 1.7 million Cambodians, died under house arrest, age 72. Well done indeed. And the reason we let them get away with it is because they killed their own people. And we're sort of fine with that. Help yourself, you know. We've been trying to kill you for ages, so you kill your own people. Well, no. Seems to be. Hitler killed people next door. Oh, stupid man. After a couple of years, we won't stand for that, will we? So, and Pol Pot was a history teacher, and Hitler was a vegetarian painter. So, mass murders come from the areas you least expect it. I don't know how the flip comes over, but it happened. So yeah, so there was a lot of that, and we built up empires. We stole countries. That's how you build an empire. We stole countries with the cunning use of flags. Yeah. You just sail around the world and stick a flag in. I claim India for Britain. And they go, you can't claim us, we live here. 500 million of us. Do you have a flag? We don't need a bloody flag. It's our country, you bastard. No flag, no country. You can't have one. That's the rules that I've just made up. And I'm backing it up with this gun that was lent from the National Rifle Association.
Oh my god.
That's it, you know. And Queen Victoria became Empress of India. She never even fucking went there. You know? So yeah. And the Second World War. After the Second World War, that's when all the empires sort of dissolved. And we came first in the Second World War, but we were financially fucked by the end of the Second World War. Because there was a period of time, it was just us and the Nazis. And they'd been making weapons for ages.
Here comes the ice cream.
Get the tanks out, we haven't got any tanks, get that ice cream van out there, get it out. Kill! All right, oh, fuck it. Everything, just throw everything at them. That's not hard. Orange fruities and zooms, throw the zooms. Or, fuck off, you bastard. Pots and pans, get pots, just throw the pots and pans at them. So by the time America came in, because you were watching a US cavalry film, because the US cavalry always comes in just towards the end of the film.
So, yeah, he's funny. You could watch him for hours. He's sorry about the language he uses occasionally.
It's fabulous.
In
My virgin ears don't know. We're college students, so.
Oh. Virgin makes good computer games.
What about the airline?
I'm not sure about the stewardesses. but yeah. So Kierkegaard, second stage, the ethical stage. But the problem is you don't really believe in the meta-narrative. So your heart's not really in it. And so the real problem that you have is that you haven't convinced yourself that life's meaning is really meaningful, right? Because you don't believe it. You're just acting the part, kind of stoic, but at the same time, you're still not happy yourself because you don't have the real belief that you need in what you say you believe. As an example of this, he, in his one story, describes Agamemnon. Agamemnon is living in the ethical stage. He's the king of the Greeks, and his job is to get them to go fight in Troy. They're all there on the island, all getting ready to go together to go fight Troy. But the problem is that the winds have stopped. So if you look at Iphigenia, so the problem is that all these men are here on the island waiting for the wind. So all these ships are sitting there idle because the wind isn't blowing in the right direction.
Oh, well, it's before
Before the
sailing, when
right.
they actually have the coast.
So sorry about all the nude men. This is a Greek movie, so.
Sorry about the language. Sorry about the nude men. Sorry.
My, what great plumage you have, sir.
In any case,
Dear God.
in order to get the winds to blow so that the ships can take off to attack Troy, the gods who are on this island apparently are upset with the way Agamemnon's men have been behaving on the island.
I mean,
And the priests say that in order to get the winds to change, they're going to have to make a sacrifice. And the sacrifice that they have to make is Agamemnon has to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia, which you probably remember. This is one of the Greek tragedies, right? And he is stuck. He doesn't believe that that's really what the gods would want. He doesn't really believe that that's what would actually enable the winds to change. But the men all believe it, and they're going to revolt against his leadership unless he agrees to do it. So he calls for his daughter to be brought to the island. It's on the other side of the island, so they could just send a messenger by horse. And what he does is he lies to her, and it says that he's agreed with Achilles to have Achilles marry her. And so she should come for her wedding to Achilles. So, of course, she comes, and in fact, her mom comes too, Clytemnestra, which he hadn't asked for her to come, but, that's the way mothers are sometimes. By the way, I've heard someone criticize my pronunciation of Clytemnestra as incorrect. How would you pronounce it?
What are you even saying?
How do you spell it?
Clytemnestra? I think I'm pronouncing it exactly the way it's spelled, but
I think ask Google Translate. Lemon tea or silent lion.
would you say it?
Well, if you click on one, I'm sure someone's gonna talk to you. Maybe they're gonna say,
My king, how I weep for you.
"Dear God."
What words are left for love to say?
Do you not want to hear how you pronounce her name?
Not right now.
Okay.
Well, it's because I read Agamemnon. I've looked this up, and
That's correct. I've heard that name before.
yes, but
Um,
the A means not,
Is it Clytemnestra?
and then that means gametes, right?
Right. So then.
So I interpret Agamemnon's name as meaning King No Balls.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
And I don't know what you might call the Clytemnestra. Is that how it would be said? In any case, he does. He invites his daughter to come for a wedding. It's a ruse. They wouldn't call it a ruse because Russia hadn't achieved that kind of notoriety yet. But in any case, she comes, and she's informed that the real reason that she's there is to die for the cause. And famously, she's persuaded to actually sacrifice herself. By the way, this is why the Greeks honor her in the same sort of way that Jesus, remember, Jesus dies for our sins. She, in a sense, dies so that the Greeks can attack the Trojans. So she sacrifices herself willingly for her people.
Her name probably means girl with balls.
Could be.
Her
I
father
haven't
was
looked up
king of no
Iphigenia
balls,
to figure out what it means.
but so,
In any case, by the way, Clytemnestra will then, once the Trojan War is over, and if you saw the movie Troy, Agamemnon dies in the battle, and that's totally wrong. That would screw up so much Greek tragedy afterwards if that happened, because of course he does come home, and that's when Clytemnestra kills him, which is why we've got this Clytemnestra's gloating over her husband's body because she just killed him. And then her sister kills, is it her sister who's the one that is in Electra, right?
Clytemnestra, the original root, Clytemnestra.
Clytemnestra?
Clytemnestra. No, not even the N. The original Greek form of the word is without the N. I mean, so says Wikipedia. And that was the Latinized version of the word, which actually was interpreted in the Byzantine era. Here.
I'm going to hear it.
I wish. Oh, shoot! Sorry, I wasn't there.
Or he's still talking about Clytemnestra.
Well, so anyway, she kills Agamemnon when he gets back. And meanwhile, she's like fallen in love with another. But then her daughter, she has another daughter who comes in and kills her. So there's like multiple stages of this tragedy that keeps going on. Because then there's the whole problem of, the daughter has broken the rules because the king Cleon has said you can't bury this guy.
that's Antigone.
Wait, that's Antigone. Am I getting my
I'm not really
plays
sure.
mixed up? Antigone.
I love Antigone. I know everything about that play.
Okay, so
But I
who's
was wondering-
Antigone in trouble for killing? Her mom, right?
No, she kills.
No, she's in trouble
she's
for
the
burying
one-
her brother.
Yeah, she insists on burying
He's
her
the
brother.
one that killed mom.
He ends up wanting to kill everyone, and then he ends up, because he makes a creed about how whoever tries to bury his son out in the field, he's gonna kill a horrible death and not leave them in a grave.
And she
blah, blah,
buries
blah.
him anyway.
And she buries him
So
anyway. And so now
she's followed one norm and broken the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does the society figure out
I forget
how to
that part.
prioritize?
Well,
but
But how is Agamemnon?
So
how is this-
Agamemnon is as Kierkegaard interprets it, Agamemnon has behaved the way he's expected to, even though his heart's not in it. So he's absolutely horrified that he's killed his daughter. But he had to because of his position. So this is the example that Kierkegaard gives us of the problem that you have with the ethical life, where you're doing what you're expected to, even though you don't believe it. But then you progress to the next stage, and this is the higher stage, and this is the stage of faith, where you know, on that night of fear and trembling, you take the leap of faith, etc. And who is the example that he uses here? Abraham. If you remember, it's kind of an interesting comparative story to Agamemnon killing his daughter, because in this situation, Abraham is told by God to kill his son. And he believes it. So he's actually going to believe the narrative, and in that narrative he's going to take his son up the hill and sacrifice him on the altar, right? And it's only because the angel will, it's a test apparently, and so just before he stabs his son, the angel will stop him and present the ram stuck in the brambles so that he could sacrifice the ram instead of his son, right? But Abraham has passed the test, according to this version of the story, because he's really believed it. He's taken the faith. He has the faith. Now, that's what you really need. You really need to believe the story that you think of as your meaning in life, or you won't really feel like you have that meaning in your life, right? That's what Kierkegaard basically holds this model up. So that's the third stage, the stage of faith. The trouble is, at least for Kierkegaard, this is me, I'm looking at it and I feel like he fails miserably. He dies when he's like 42. He runs out of money, his inheritance, and he dies on the street. Well, he actually collapses on the street and dies a few days later. I think because he failed. He was basically still totally depressed. There were other reasons he was ill. From when he was very young, he fell out of a tree and broke his knee, which, sorry about that, but you know, it's just, so he always had like a limp and a strange kind of shape, etc.
Strange shape.
You pronounced her name right, by the way.
I did?
As far as the Latin adaptation, it's 100% correct. Let's see.
There
It's
you
just
go.
dumb luck. Actually, I don't believe that there's a true, correct pronunciation of any Void at all.
There you go.
All that
Thanks
works
for
just
that.
for pronunciation. I know. I can't find. There's no
It
way.
does sound just the way I say it.
It does. It does. Well, I was looking for the original Greek pronunciation, but I'm not. I don't know if the next really alphabet.
Well, if I talk the way I was raised to talk, you know, then everything sounds very different, you know, because I talk differently when I'm from Philly.
Shit.
Right, that's how they.
Okay. That escalated quickly.
I'm just
there's
kidding.
a condition where kids actually put on muscle mass like uncontrollably, you know?
Yeah,
It's weird.
Where did
Huh?
that come from?
Yeah.
What? What are we talking about?
Well,
I missed something there.
I am on the same page as you. I have no idea what's
Practicing
happening.
rapid subject changes.
Squirrel.
Yeah.
That was a
exactly.
squirrel?
That was a squirrel.
So that's something to do with body, muscle.
Yeah, that's all
It's
I
kind of
got.
like a dysphagia issue where, you know, people encourage people to work at excess from an early age to accomplish something that most people don't. Ever.
Well, Kierkegaard is dead.
Well, at an early age we found out. Still a child.
I'm still
I've really
curious about
enjoyed
this
these
point,
videos.
because that's an
Yeah.
interesting version of that.
Because I never think to look up how things are interpreted via other, you know, nationalities, you know, other locales in the world. It's kind of like taking the filter off, you know.
Who's anyone?
You're gonna be late.
So we need a quiz question.
Yes, we do. That'd be cool. How do you pronounce?
How would you pronounce Clytemnestra?
The A is strong, the Y is
No,
strong.
you're not feeling it.
Q in there. Silent.
Well, we've talked about meaning of life issues quite frequently.
Yes, we
And
have.
other big
It's very
items,
Oh, shoot.
to some folks' chagrin, I suppose. So I guess I just leave it at that.
So we had Empire.
So yeah.
So yeah. What then would life be? Let me check the book and see if did I have underlines for you to contemplate. Perhaps
I would really
651.
enjoy that.
Yeah, because we've got Thomas Nagel here too. So what then would life be? Well, if you're looking at the text, like the wind through the desert, a thoughtless and fruitless activity of an eternal oblivion, were always lurking hungrily for its prey. There was no power strong enough to wrest it from its maw. How empty then and comfortless life would be. But therefore it is not thus, but as God created man and woman, etc., etc. These seem like the thoughts of a kid to some extent when I'm reading this on page 651. But he who strove with God became greater than all. It seems like nonsense. But then, if you went on and read Thomas Nagel's The Absurd, this looks like Kierkegaard's Desert again. What we say to convey the absurdity of our lives often has to do with space or time. We are tiny specks in the infinite vastness of the universe. Our lives are mere instants, even on a geological time scale, let alone a cosmic one. We will all be dead any minute. Well, that's nice to think about. But of course, none of these evident facts can be what makes life absurd, if it is absurd, etc. Page 654, Thomas Nagel says that no larger context or further purpose is needed to prevent these acts from being pointless. I mean, whether you take aspirin for a headache, attend the exhibit of a work of a painter one admires, or stop a child from putting his hand on a hot stove, you don't need a larger context, a meta-narrative for that kind of stuff. And if we do try to justify life, it's justified in terms of something outside itself, which is also justified. Then you end up with an infinite regress that results. Right? The standard arguments for absurdity appear therefore to fail as arguments, yet I believe they attempt to express something that is difficult to state but fundamentally correct. In ordinary life, the situation is absurd when it includes a conspicuous discrepancy between pretension or aspiration and reality, etc. Many people's lives are absurd, temporarily or permanently. If we take other people seriously and devote ourselves to them, that only multiplies the problem. I agree, though, on page 656 when he says, those seeking to supply their lives with meaning usually envision a role or function in something larger than themselves. That was William James's argument in the Varieties of the Religious Experience, that what people really need is belief in something larger. Pardon?
Sublime, like where you think, well, you see something so big that, I mean, you just think it's beautiful. I guess, or something like that.
Like a $1,600 dividend?
Yeah. I'm not sure.
I think bigger, but like for me, the meaning of life is learning as much as I can, and then sharing that to screw up the minds of as many people as I can as well, right? You know,
It's like each time you're able to affect a small change, it's like a very accomplished jeweler putting one more facet into an elaborate gemstone.
wow, I like it. That's good. That's good stuff. I like the use of diamonds and sorts of things. Me worried though the other day when I was listening to the Google thing on
Oh, and about VR, but I'll let you finish.
what's it? Maya Angelou, I think.
Maya Angelou?
Wasn't
Yeah.
it?
What about her?
Wasn't her birthday yesterday?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and the Google thing, if you played it,
Yeah.
and,
Okay,
and you
Colin
heard
Powell.
all the different actors reading lines from Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
There was one that talked about diamonds, and that was, I thought, a little off-putting, but
Was it like a Diana, Princess Diana kind of reference, or?
no. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if can you ever find those again?
I don't know.
Camus and the myth of the Sisyphus, right? That's the story where the poor guy is just constantly rolling the rock up and then it rolls back down.
Right.
Is that it? Or is that the one where the eagle keeps eating the liver?
No,
No,
No, I
that's
think it's-
different.
The Sisyphus is rolling the rock, right?
the other
Pretty
one was Prometheus.
Yeah.
Ah, thanks. Yes. So you think, wow, that's a perfect example of a meaningless life, right? You know, you roll the rock up the hill, dang, it rolls back down. You roll it back up, and it rolls back down, and it just that's meaningless life. Well, Nagel comes up with a great line here. He says, what if he really enjoyed rolling the rock uphill?
I just imagine the literal.
You know, then that's not meaningless. He gets to enjoy doing that constantly. And that's a very meaningful life, right? So it's all in your interpretation of what you're doing that makes it meaningless or not. So so consequently the absurdity of our situation derives not from a collision between our expectations and the world, but from a collision within ourselves, because it's my own interpretation of it that makes that meaningless. So that's kind of cool. Thank you, Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel looks, you know who he looks like? He looks like Bilbo when he's desiring the ring.
Like the creepy Flash in the movie?
You know when he's, you mean like when he goes,
Yeah,
you know, when he goes
yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
Thomas Nagel.
I just got to that part of the book today.
You actually reading
I'm literally right at that part. It's kind of fun.
As the
Magnolia.
dean of Harvard Law School, I
Burn them as correct.
That is him. Holy wow.
Doesn't he look like Bilbo?
He looks like Menu too. Mentat, the Mentat from Dune.
Oh, from Dune.
Before he was murdered
Yeah.
by
Perhaps to step back from them, but nevertheless allow themselves.
He had to milk the cat
lives that is
for
not
the
fundamentally derived
anecdote,
from
not
other
anecdote. That's different.
This
It looks like
problem
Bilbo.
has been around for a long time, and much of what I say about it will be familiar.
Remember, he was also the one that says, "What's it like to be a bat?"
All right.
why is he partially blind?
I hope I have eyebrows
Is
when
that like
I'm old.
I don't think so.
Crazy and
He's reading without glasses.
philosopher looking.
Oh, I mean, he could be blind in one eye.
You want philosopher looking eyebrows? His words, not mine.
Like that when I'm his age.
I trim mine every once in a while, but I actually kind of like them, except they stab me in the eye. Actually.
That is long. I've never had one longer than like that.
So, fun?
Yes.
So, meaning of life. It's what you make of it. Camus. But Richard Taylor, meaning of life, meaningless existence. So I think I suggested we go all the way up to 67. So I don't know if you read the assignment or not. Susan Wolf, we talk about at a different time. Yes, Matt?
With Sisyphus, how you say is, I guess if you don't say that, if you say he doesn't enjoy rolling the rock up, he just does it, And that is, what do I think? You say it's meaningless, but I mean, it's an example of what is not meaningless, but doesn't that add meaning to it? Or no? Is that the whole point?
To say that it's not meaning, yes,
Yeah.
by,
So then
it's meaningful.
in a way.
Yeah, what Nagel is arguing is you yourself can make it meaningful. I mean, there are lots of folks that spend their lives in an ascetic, not aesthetic, which is happiness, but ascetic meaning giving up everything, right? That just spend their life like, you imagine spending your life at St. Catherine's Monastery, you know, and basically concentrating on what? Just helping the tourist every day, you know, walking up that trail, making sure that they, you know, have adequate water supplies or, you know, whatever, make sure they're wearing the right kind of clothing or something. I don't know. What do you do in a spot like that, you know? Don't fall off the camel. Maybe having some emergency medical care or something, you know, but that's your whole life. You imagine? You know.
I think meaning is used for things that you use, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is meaningful to those that believe that's what they're doing, is something meaningful. Whereas on the other hand, you know, if what you want to do is have a week's vacation at some Riviera-like resort or something, never going to happen because you're never going to be able to afford it.
Oh, and also, I guess, by my logic, I guess, then what's meaningless is kind of outside of our perception of what we don't know or we've never perceived or seen. I don't know.
It's outside of our perception.
Yeah, I guess. Like, well, I mean, just outside of our touching stuff. Like,
Well,
just
like,
knowing that there's other planets out there, it
I-
doesn't really help us too much. So, well, for me, anyways, right at this moment. So it's kind of meaningless to know. But I guess, but if I want to add meaning to it, I mean, I don't know.
Like,
It's weird.
like the importance of defining a mantra for one's existence in Buddhism, right? Right? Or something that's
Or eating vanilla ice cream.
I mean, yeah, there is no meaning to that
Yeah.
unless it's from England, because then it actually tastes like vanilla and it's rich and creamy. But in America, it sucks. So.
Well, that's because we can't get decent vanilla beans. There's a shortage worldwide.
That and our dairy sucks.
But you have chocolate. What's the deal?
What's chocolate?
Same with chocolate.
Chocolate is
In
belongs
fact,
in
you
chocolate.
can get Snickers
not
ice cream now.
Yeah, that's true.
That's pretty rad.
The cool part about Snickers is that they can go right to the flavor labs and just add the
The
essential
cool
oils.
part of Snickers ice cream is that no one else in my family likes it.
That's really why it's good.
That's the best part.
That works out really well.
You're the only one. You're like,
But the other night I saw, I think I mentioned the movie Ready Player One.
yes.
Yes, you've mentioned it.
And the moral of that movie, as I took it from the crazy guy that invented all the games, whatever his name was that reality, the only reality is reality. So he's criticizing the virtual reality games that he's been responsible for creating as attracting so much of everybody's time that the meaning of their lives is essentially totally within the game, and they can't stand reality, right? You know, so, you know, and if you think about it, wow, we do that. You know, what do people do for fun? Go to movies, play games.
Yeah, what the hell?
We could call it escapism.
That's
Is it not though? I mean,
Americans' best. It's like
I mean,
kind
it
of
used to be
social contract with
religion.
escapism.
Used to be religion, right? You know, everybody, you know, thinking about eternity, right? And I'm gesturing up because if you're in
Solomon's house, it's kind of big.
the dome, you know, in Cologne or something, and you're looking up at the ceiling, right? Whoa, what an impressive, place, and it, just pulls your attention up into the rafters. Amazing, right? In a sense, that's escapist from reality, which I think is what he's trying to say in that movie, right? So don't be so thrilled with virtual reality in the game that you forget to live. Dumbledore says the same thing to Harry, when he's looking at the mirror of Erised. Remember?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's
right?
Like enamored by it.
Don't forget. Don't get so wrapped up in dreams that you forget to live, right?
Wow, you know your shit.
So I've got to ask a quick quiz question.
Like, for meaning and stuff, should we, talk about the meaning of...
Well,
I
I was going to ask, what do you think of squirrels coming up in class?
Okay, that works.
Does it annoy you when squirrels pop up?
I like that question.
Yeah.
Always going for my nuts.
Cool. What the hell?
Sorry about the Agamemnon thing.
Why? Is that a squirrel?
Was it?
I don't know.
Sometimes I have a hard time differentiating.
Yeah, I feel like everything's
Which makes
relevant
it-
in this class because it's life and philosophy is life. So,
And chocolate ice cream.
Chocolate belongs in chocolate. Not ice cream.
I think I'm going to go home and
anti-chocolate
have
now.
some Snickers ice
What?
cream.
you don't like chocolate?
You heard me. Blowing your mind. It's the end of class.
No, that's not blowing my mind. That's just making me sad for your existence.
I don't like chocolate. I'm just taking away. I don't want chocolate in my ice cream anymore. I just don't want it.
That's weird.
You're a werewolf, I understand.